Hello, my name is Asun Lopez Varela. I am professor at Universidad Complutense Madrid, and I'm going to be talking to you about sustainable futures. I would like to thank the Eurasia Foundation for organizing this seminar and inviting me to deliver this lecture. In this lecture, we will delve into the foundation of the concept of sustainable development, embraced and put forth by the United Nations, and we will look at how it has evolved since the late 1980s. Several meetings and reports are also provided with the lecture so that you can gain a deeper knowledge into the topic. In spite of efforts by the international community and United Nations, there is still a lack of common understanding of education for sustainable development, stemming from these difficulties in bringing environmental sustainability into the mainstream activities of educational institutions. Experts point to a gap between concern for the environment and taking action. Recent research shows that this gap can be attributed to low levels of understanding of environmental issues at stake, as well as lack of attention to social, emotional, or behavioral learning. This lecture recognizes the importance of embedding sustainability in all phases and stages of education, as well as in formal and non-formal learning. Integrating environmental sustainability into the curricula and educational practice and applying it to learning environment is not systematic, and it's dealt with differently across the world. One reason for this is that there is a lack of commonly accepted principles and a shared language on sustainability that could guide its implementation and support exchange of ideas and best practice. Another reason is that it requires multidisciplinary and participatory approaches in education that are often difficult to put into practice. The Eurasia Foundation has been doing great work in this regard. In Europe, reports like the European Green Deal highlight the key role of education and training in engaging learners, educators, parents, and the wider community in the environmental challenges facing the planet. The recommendations aim to help member states strengthen policy development, learning, teaching, and cooperation in sustainability. The communication on the European education area also refers and highlights the importance of education and training in supporting the move towards a more sustainable and resource-efficient society and economy. This lecture approaches sustainability from a systemic framework that integrates aspects of social sciences and humanities fields within a STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I try to establish an interdisciplinary approach, and my claim is that art and humanities can contribute to raise awareness on sustainability by raising emotional and empathic responses in people. Then one example we will look at, it's Mesbry's poem, Anthropocene, Anthropocene. Among the objectives, as you can see on your screen, are the following. To enable young people to envision the competences they acquire in their higher education programs in connection to both local and global issues within the United Nations framework for sustainable development. To help integrate sustainable development goals in national education systems, to support learners to move from awareness of environmental issues to an understanding of these issues, empowering them to act on personal and community level, to implement multidisciplinary and participatory approaches in education adapted to understanding and acting on sustainable development challenges, to promote ways to embed sustainability in all activities within educational institutions, including management, governance, and community relations, to guide the implementation of sustainable development goals and support exchange of ideas and best practices. Among the operational actions to help gain an understanding of the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals at all levels, local, national, global, to connect Sustainable Development Goals to personal, family, and community levels, to help young people explore the impact of existing inequalities in the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals and envision opportunities to make change possible, as well as the transfer and exchange of know-how and best practices. Also, to do networking, enhance human potential and capacity building in order to inspire ideas and projects, raise public awareness on key aspects of sustainability, take part in public discussion and actions to implement sustainability by means of makers' perspectives. And the makers' perspective, as you can see in your screen, encompasses a number of steps, for example, helping recraft the local global maker relationship and small-scale local embedded actions, help explore the role of digital technologies in local global relationships regarding sustainability, help bring the human and non-human into equitable and sustainable relationships in order to maintain ecosystems, help establish ethically grounded value chains from source, supply, design, production, marketing, consumer use, reuse, and recycling, think of innovative forms of leadership and organization, and provide knowledge-based contribution to the policy making on sustainability. Sustainability has formed part of the United Nations goals since the 1980s. The first explicit common reference to sustainable development was in the 1987 Brundtland Report of the United Nations Commission on Environment and Development. In this report, sustainable development was defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Some principles come from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and recognize the interconnected of national and global developmental challenges and therefore universal commitments to address them. The first definition of sustainability focuses on actors, people, and their contexts, space, and time, and thus it offers a glimpse of a narrative where future generations bear the consequences of present-day actions. However, although the definition is centered on the material outcomes, it does not specify the processes involved. It is also difficult to predict in which way and why some choices will compromise the needs of future generations. The Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, set by the United Nations in the year 2000, were a first attempt to formulate global targets, and they were the predecessors of the current 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which are part of the 2030 United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development. 189 countries are signed up the Millennium Development Goals following the Millennium Declaration in order to focus international development efforts around 8 key issues from a period of 15 years between 2000 and 2015. The European Parliament designated 2015 the European Year for Development to encourage the direct involvement critical thinking and active interest of all citizens in development cooperation, and to give a better understanding of the importance not only for developing countries but also for European citizens. In 2015, France also hosted the 21st session of the Convention on Climate Change, intended to achieve a global agreement on climate with the aim of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. The Millennium Development Goals were initially concerned with leveling social inequalities as a result of fragile economies, corrupt governments, war, and they focus on 8 goals: eradicating extreme poverty, achieve universal education, promote gender equality, improve maternal health, combat other diseases such as AIDS, reduce child mortality, ensure environmental sustainability, and develop global partnerships for the development of all these challenges. As seen, environmental sustainability was already present among these goals, but the 2030 Agenda, with its 17 sustainable goals, includes much more specific targets and interrelationships between social, economic, environmental, and political factors. The Millennium Development Goals set targets and indicators for poverty reduction in order to increase living standards. Millennium Development Goals were targeted to developing least developed and poor countries. They focus only in some social aspects, seeking mainly poverty reduction and better health. They were based on the principle of rich countries aiding poorer countries. Reports were produced by a smaller group of technical experts, and they focus on quantity, for example, high enrollment rates, rather than quality. Since the year 2000 and until 2015, Millennium Development Goals were successful in halving the number of people in extreme poverty and raising primary education enrollment to 91% in developing countries. According to the World Health Organization, child mortality rates were cut by half and maternal mortality rate by almost half. AIDS and malaria rates were also cut by 40 and 30% respectively. In contrast, Sustainable Development Goals set concrete targets and indicators to promote a holistic view with a three-pillar approach, focusing on social progress and health, economic growth, and environmental protection. The Sustainable Development Goals target and apply uniformly to all the countries, rich, middle income, and poor, and they underpin by the principle all different but all equal. They also strengthen equity, human rights, and non-discrimination. Sustainable Development Goals focus on the quality of education and the role of education in achieving a more humane and world, education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, and they include an intense consultation process among 193 United Nations member states, including also civil society organizations, academicians, scientists, private sectors, and other stakeholders around the world. The Sustainable Development Goals are designed to be more measurable by certain indicators, so that countries could be held more accountable to their successes or shortcomings. Indicators are designed to be SMART, that is, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. The 2000 Agenda for the Earth Charter also defined a sustainable global society as one founded on respect for nature, universal human rights, economic justice, and a culture of peace. Like the Millennium Development Goals, this definition focuses on people, with the priority of ending poverty and hunger and ensure dignity, equality, and a healthy environment for all human beings, ensuring that technological progress occurred in harmony with nature. The planet, there was also a focus on the planet, seeking to protect it from degradation by included sustainable consumption and production, sustainable managing of natural resources, and urgent action on climate change. This agenda also focuses on society to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive communities free from fear and violence, with the participation of all countries, all stakeholders, and all people. And they also focus on revitalizing global partnership for sustainable development based on spirit of strengthened global solidarity and the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable. However, inequality also prevailed as a crucial issue after conferences such as the Rio 2000 Summit, Rio Plus 20 Summit, which highlighted how inequality was still a worthwhile phenomenon. According to various reports from Europe, for example, Eurocom 2010 and Europe 2020, there is an urgent need to strengthen sustainability in education across world regions, and hence the purpose of this lecture. Technology and structural development are changing education in Europe, but sustainability requires a much deeper level of cooperation. So what can we learn about the vision behind the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals by looking back? While the Millennium Development Goals tackle urgent social issues, after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a growing awareness that global development goals could not be limited to poverty, equality, and health, and a more comprehensive approach to sustainable development began to evolve. In the first decade of the 21st century, climate change became the main target of discussion, with detractors preventing positive advance to solve problems. Scientific advancements in reporting on biodiversity and other ecological areas contributed to the development of the environmental pillar within the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Since 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has also had unexpected impacts in many ways. Scientists say consequence of shifts in the equilibriums of ecosystems. Additionally, the pandemic has contributed to create other problems, debilitating the economy, creating job loss, and producing great shifts in human consuming habits. So let's talk a little bit more about the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which encompasses the period from 2015 to 2030. Here, sustainability has become the umbrella that holds together all other competences in educational frameworks. Besides its use as a protective object, come sun or come rain, an umbrella is a device with a central cylinder that holds together a network of dipsticks. Its shape is perhaps the reason of the use of the term in many fields such as umbrella architecture. When addressing complex concepts such as sustainability, it is important to visualize abstractions that have multiple dimensions, and this is what we will try to do in this lecture in order to introduce sustainability from a semiotic point of view and present a framework with some parameters. The United Nations estimated about 3.5 trillion to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Funding comes from national budgets, and there is overseas development aid for developing countries. But this is not enough with governmental funding to cover all the goals. and there are over 193 states involved, which include political actors, together with thousands of organizations, civil society groups, actors in private business and the corporate sector, academia, non-governmental organizations, and so on. A big problem in the goals themselves is that they are not really binding. The process of coming to agreements, it's a very complex one. So what's stopping us from taking urgent measures? How can young people help and influence decision-making over sustainable development? What does sustainable development mean for how we live and consume on a daily basis? So these are some of the questions we want to tackle during this lecture. What are the challenges for young people? Young people should be able to undertake their own youth-led campaigns and collaborate with each other to get their views across with regards to sustainable development goals. They must be involved in decisions that affect them so that they develop key skills that will support their future livelihoods, education, and participation in society. They must be supported to be involved in the implementation plan, its monitoring, and evaluation. Education can provide greater knowledge and skills on the key issues identified in the goals. For example, in Goal 4, Target 4.7, equity is identified with the following statement. All learners should have acquired through education the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, sustainable habits and lifestyles, knowledge with regards to the defense of human rights, gender equality, the promotion of culture of peace and non-violence, and appreciation of cultural diversity for culture's contribution to sustainable development. So this is there, and we need young people to get more involved in promoting these aspects in their lives. No? So although various campaigns have been launched to share the sustainable development goals in schools all over the world, with activities adapted to specific education settings, much more could be done in higher education. And the Eurasia Foundation has been working very hard in this regard. So here are some questions for you. Looking at the 17 goals, where do you see a connection with yourselves as an individual and your role as a volunteer, young person, employee, student, citizen, academic, etc.? Are some goals more important to you than others? Which are the most important? Do you see any barriers, challenges to these new goals, and how and why? If there were one or two key messages that you would want to convey to those people in power, for example, president, the minister, politicians, etc., what would the message be? What actions would you take around these goals? What would you do in short, long term, personally and otherwise? What support would we need from key players, leaders, stakeholders to enable, empower us to make a contribution, take action on the new goals? All the 17 Sustainable Development Goals can be broken down in 3 pillars: social progress and health, economic growth and circular bioeconomy, and the environmental pillar. There are many complex linkages between them that can bring positive as well as negative interactions, as we shall see. The greatest challenge is to generate synergies and complementarity between the goals. The economic pillar should be at the service of society as well as within the boundaries defined by the planetary ecosystem. Products should be designed to be sustainable, and areas such as clothing production, housing, healthcare, food production and consumption, transportation, and so on will need to be adapted to reduce overconsumption of natural resources. Food production is also related to health issues and non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, such as diabetes or cancer. Thus, future policies, including those in education, should take a holistic and dynamic view on sustainable development, considering human and non-human systems, involving, for example, technology, animal care, the environment in general, and so on. We will address this with an example later in this lecture. So let's start looking at the different pillars of the Sustainable Development Goals. First, we start with Pillar 1, Social Progress and Health. And this pillar includes the following sustainable goals. Number 1, no poverty. Number 2, zero hunger. Number 3, good health and well-being. Number 4, education. Number 5, gender equality. Number 6, clean water sanitation. Number 7, affordable and clean energy. Number 11, sustainable cities. And number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. The first one seeks to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. The second goal, zero hunger, tries to achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Number 3, good health and well-being, tries to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages and for all people. Number 4, education, tries to ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Number 5, having to do with gender equality, tries to achieve this and empower women and girls. Number 6, clean water sanitation, tries to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for everyone. Number 7, affordable and clean energy, ensures access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy for all. Number 11, sustainable cities, tries to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And number 16, peace and strong institutions, tries to promote peaceful and inclusive societies and providing access to justice. Regarding the second pillar, economic growth and circular bioeconomy, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development defines circular economy as a market that gives incentives to reusing products rather than scraping them and then extracting new resources. Bioeconomy has its roots in biological production, decarbonized economy, no longer relying on fossil sources, and the use of renewable power energy. Sustainable Development Goals in this pillar include Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, Goal 9, industry, innovation, infrastructure and inequality, Goal 10, reduce inequalities, Goal 12, consumption and production. So Goal 8, for example, tries to promote sustained, inclusive and economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for everyone. Goal 9 tries to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Goal 10 to reduce inequalities, and Goal 12 tries to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. The global pandemic and its associated crises, also climate change, environmental and natural problems, resource shortages, social fracturing, economic disparities, and other calamities have given us plenty of reasons to want to explore sustainability. For years, different theories have claimed diverse modes of doing this: circular economy, bio-based economy, and so on. Each of them focuses on particular objects, for instance, on improving efficiency by means of technologies. But tech production has not been the solution. Instead, the rapid growth of technology and the upgrading of products have become part of the problem. Only a few weeks ago, the United States recognized this trend to be unsustainable and has put forth a number of initiatives to extend, for example, the obsolescence of technical apparatus and machines. So now we come to Pillar 3, climate change, life underwater and life on land. And this pillar, it's becoming even stronger and we will see later some information on recent reports on climate change. One of them was just out last month in August. So Pillar 3 addresses several targets, including Goal 13, climate action, Goal 14, life underwater, and Goal 15, life on land. The first one, number 13, means to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. And there are several agreements in this regard. Goal 14 is to conserve and sustain the use of oceans, seas, and marine resources. And Goal 15 to promote, restore, and promote sustainability in territorial ecosystems. Manage forests, for example, combat desertification, halt land degradation, also prevent biodiversity loss. And overall, Pillar 3 aims at integrating climate policy into a whole range of national policies, including education and research through international and multilateral cooperation. So we're going to focus now on some of the reports and recommendations regarding Sustainable Development Goals. And recent reports, for example, from the European Union, the EAC B1-B2 or the Q4 2021, which was a proposal for a council recommendation on education for environmental sustainability, point to a slow progress, specifically in several of the goals, including Goal 13, climate action, 15, life on land, 14, life below water, 7, affordable and clean energy, 12, responsible consumption and production, and number 1, no hunger and agricultural and farming practices, Goal 2. On your screen, you have a chart with some of the programs that have been identified regarding the environmental pillar. However, the most compelling report was out just last month in August, and it suggests that some changes are irreversible on centennial and millennium timescales, and is calling for urgent action. So what was this report? We're going to have more information about it in the course of this lecture. It's called the 6th Assessment Report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 2021, and it's a summary addressed mostly to policymakers, and it was issued in August, and it's been shocking. It includes 3 special reports on global warming and the impact of warming above 1.5 degrees Celsius, particularly in the northern hemisphere. Warming is mostly related to global greenhouse gas emission, causing desertification, land degradation, the lack of sustainable land management. It also impacts food security and fluxes in terrestrial ecosystems, including, for example, heat waves, episodes of heavy precipitation and rain, flooding, alongside droughts and fires, in a combination of hot, dry, windy conditions, as well as tropical cyclones. On the ocean, global sea levels are rising due to ice sheet and glacier mass loss in the Arctic regions, and there is an increase in deoxygenation and acidification, and drop of oxygen levels affecting life underwater. The report includes warming percentages of probability occurrence, and an interactive atlas is available at the link on your screen. The previous slide showed the levels in a graph, the levels of global warming, contributions of warming based on various complementary approaches. And in this slide, you can see the future anthropogenic emissions and of key drivers of climate change and warming. And there are 5 illustrative scenarios. One which is not as hard as the last one, no? And you can see the total warming. In dark, the darker shade is the highest scenario, the highest level of global warming. If we continue with the emissions of CO2 that we have at the moment, any changes, no matter in which scenario, are going to be irreversible on centennial and millennial timescales, influencing water availability, quality of food production, biodiversity. You can see also in the following slide the rates of CO2 taken up by land and oceans projected to decrease in the second half of the 21st century and to take up less carbon in response to declining atmospheric CO2 concentrations, turning into a weak net source by the year 2100. Sea level will continue to rise over the 21st century between 0.28 and 0.55 meters, even in the very low emissions scenario. So we've looked at the 3 pillars of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the Agenda for 2030. And the last one was the environmental pillar. And we have one more goal, which is Goal 17, which seeks to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development by engaging, connecting, and empower people working on joined-up implementation across sectors. In this goal, governance emerges as the key implementing force for sustainable development. As we can see, without the strong incorporation and management of national governments, the panorama in climate change that we have just presented would be catastrophic. So sustainable development is context dependent. It's grounded in the social material circumstances of people and places. And good governance needs to adapt to these particular environments, countries, and territories, and enable networking and partnerships involving all social sectors and individuals in order to open paths for sustainable development. In the following slide, you can see the targets contained within the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You have some of the targets, not all of them. There's 169. And also in the following slide. The kind of networking among the actors involved and also relations among the goals that we have mentioned. It's fundamental, and I claim in this lecture that sustainability acts as what is called a complex attractor, and I will explain what this is in a few minutes. So British economist Kate Raworth, professor at Oxford and Cambridge universities, revolutionized the idea of sustainability by questioning the capacity of continuous economic growth. And she did this in her book, Donut Economic: 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. So hers was a counter-proposal to mainstream economic thinking. And in this book, she explains that sustainability is an organic concept and that it's one that can be assimilated to a complex attractor. And sometimes these are represented in the shape of a donut. She also drew the comparison to a biological organism, sustainability as a biological organism. In her examples, she mentions the impossibility of continuous growth, technology, and so on. And she points that in order to thrive, any living organism takes energy, makes use and uses this energy, but it also loses it back into the system in a sort of auto-regulative regenerative process. So let me give some examples of how a stronger relationship between the goals needs to be achieved, One example is Airbnb. In 2018, they claim to be an environmentally friendly form of travel worldwide. And you have the link to the article on your screen. However, this company is owned by the large investment fund Blackstone and Cerberus, and as you know, it uses private homes as tourist accommodation. And this has caused tremendous problems for local residents, creating a shortage of long-term rental possibilities and an increase in the rental prices for local people. For example, in Spain, the problem has been very, very important. In Barcelona, in particular, you have the link there to an article in one of the Spanish newspapers, El País, and the article is in English. Additionally, the surge of Airbnb caused the sale of public housing to vulture funds because they saw opportunities to easy money. And this gobbled property assets in Spain and in other countries, causing the eviction of many, many people. So it is important to think of sustainability as a complex attractor, part of a dynamic system made up of many parts that can evolve independently and have unpredictable consequences. An attractor is a state of a particular phenomenon with multiple dimensions within a dynamic system in continuous change, which requires, of course, rapid adaptability. So how to measure unpredictability or try to come close to predicting unpredictability? Indicators are typically used to measure a state of a particular phenomenon. And for each of the targets within the 17 sustainable goals, we have indicators. One example is the reducing maternal mortality rate within Goal 3, which is monitored by the World Health Organization. And in this case, the indicator is trying to bring down the number of live births. Indicators act as a feedback mechanism, allowing the monitoring of particular states and comparing the progress made. So these 17 sustainable goals in the 2030 agenda were designed with the participation of numerous specialized organizations acting as monitors, and all of which are supervised by the Interagency Expert Group of the United Nations Statistical Commission. So, for example, the indicators in Goal 1, No Poverty, are monitored by United Nations Development Programme, while those in Goal 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth, are monitored by the International Labour Organization. So these indicators provide information to achieve the goals, they help set priorities and the plans to accomplish the goals, and they also help measure the commitment of participant partners with regards to the different goals. Indicators are a tool to ensure accountability. An integrated approach to systemic sustainability requires breaking up the habit of treating stages of production or end products and looking at the connections and intra and interrelations between the various elements that constitute our world. And in this regard, and in this integrated approach, sustainability functions as an attractor, evolving and involving multiple and multidimensional variables, and it becomes a transitional state within a complex dynamic system that keeps changing. So what is a system? A system is a non-linear dynamic set of actors, relations, objects, and things, and all the intra and interconnections. And contemplating matter as, for example, inanimate thing is one of the impediments to the emergence of a more ecological and materially sustainable mode of production and consumption. Because all physical materials have their own way of creating agency, creating effects on our lives. They have interactions, they have potentialities distinct and different from human agency, but they do influence our lives. So systems can be biological and they can be cultural, that is situated in a particular environment, place, and time. Territorial organization includes systems such as neighborhoods, cities, counties, regions, nations, continents, and the planet Earth. And systems can be open, but they can also be thought as closed. Also, closed systems which have boundaries or walls, like for example, territory, these are normally defined artificially, although they create a finite space to a certain extent. Most systems, whether biological, natural, and cultural, are interconnected. And one example is the Eurasia Foundation, because it's seeking this interaction among systems in different parts of the Earth. So let me give an example of a biocultural system, which can be the human body. The human body is made of biocomponents and is culturally distributed within a community, a nation, and the global society as a whole. So biological processes within the body are interrelated. The digestive system functions in relation to the respiratory system, the circulatory, and all other bodily systems. So although operating in a sort of connected network, the distribution of the components in a given system can vary because systems are open to their surroundings. So this means that the system can have different states in a short time span, while remaining the same in the long time span. For example, biological bodies require energy in order to function, so they obtain this energy from food. Each organism regulates food intake in particular ways at cellular level. If food intake affects micro and macro structures regulating body temperature, activity, and so on. And in turn, these also have an impact on our social lives because maybe if we have not eaten for a long time, we are weak, we are not able to interact with other people, and so on. So everything is related to everything. So as mentioned, a state in a system, it's a momentary position in space and time because the system is dynamic and is changing. And this position depends on physical properties, the space, the context, as well as on the distribution of these properties in a particular time. And sustainability is such a system. To have a complete understanding of how it works, we need to contemplate it from an integrated approach that looks at the full spectrum of scales, networks, states, and shifts, looking at sustainability across multiple spatiotemporal dimensions, considering the intra and interactions of all system components. And this is what the last report has been trying to do, contemplating 5 different scenarios, and the full spectrum of scales. Individual factors cannot be mapped in a calculated way because some patterns and behaviors might emerge unpredictably, precisely because systems are open to new inputs, as we have mentioned. So in order to measure things to a certain extent, we have indicators, And to go back to the example of food intake in the human body, it might have undesired consequences if digestion is interrupted by an external action such as sunstroke or suddenly diving into water, which might break the digestion process. So these unpredictable events can happen. And as we have mentioned, complex systems are dynamic. They continuously change and adapt. And for this reason, their behavior is not fully predictable. However, it is possible to detect some regular patterns that might help build some resilience into the system. And this is what the indicators try to do. And if you want to read more about emergent behaviors and complex systems, you have there on your screen two interesting sources. So this part of my lecture is trying to give you some hints onto the working of complex systems. And the notion of emergence was formulated in a volume by Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, who are Chilean scientists, in their volume The Tree of Knowledge from 1984. And they formulated the definition of enaction, that is to bring forth, and a notion, this is connected also to their theory on autopoiesis. They explain, these biologists explain that biological systems are autopoietic, which means that they are proactive, self-organizing, and self-regulating, in particular spatiotemporal spans. And the term enaction, it's a blend in English from enabling and emergent, and also incorporating the idea of self-regulation and action. And it's a very important notion with regards to the idea of emergence, unpredictable consequences coming out of a combination of causes. The Anthropocene, we will talk about this a little bit later in the lecture. It's our current era, as you know. And these biologists describe in their volume, The Embodied Mind, the kind of encounters that we're going to find in the Anthropocene. So the key point then is that the species brings forth and specified its own domain of problems. And this domain does not exist out there in an environment that acts as a landing pad for organisms that somehow drop or parachute into the world. Instead, living beings and their environment stand in relation to each other through mutual specification or co-determination. So basically, what they're saying is that even non-animate things, the environment, animals, etc., climate change, can have an impact, very important impact on our lives. And also whatever we do on those environments turns back on us. A similar idea, it's present in what is called actor network theory, which considered that the split between nature, society, and artifacts is artificial. And we have there a quotation from Bruno Latour from his volume We Have Never Been Modern, Harvard University Press, and he says that a complete separation between the natural world, constructed nevertheless by man, and the social world, sustained nevertheless by things, is not possible and is completely artificial, and that these spheres must be reconnected. So all these scientists and scholars are talking about the need for connection among all the parts of the system. We have another example here coming from quantum physics. A scholar, Karen Barad, proposed the concept of intra-action to explain that relata do not pre-exist relations. Things, relata, within phenomena emerge through specific intra-actions. As a matter of intra-acting, it is an enactment, not something that someone has or something has. So for Barad, agency is not a consequence of human activity, but of a specific material reconfigurings of the world through which local determinations of boundaries and properties and meanings are differentially enacted. So matter is substance in its intra-active becoming. So basically what they're saying is that we need to look at all the parts of the system and all these emergent interactions that might occur without even being aware of the consequences. So one of the key aspects is understanding sustainability is this modulation of agency, understood as the result of relationships among actors and not their property. So it's not just a humans acting on the environment and being the only capable ones because all the animals are inferior, or the environment is not even considered an animate thing. So in this new vision, the environment, it's a living thing. It's a biological organism that can have agency on our lives, even stone, even things that appear lifeless. Okay, so these theories use the term actors and to include humans and non-humans, and also in the Anthropocene, technological devices, not just non-human biological entities like animal, plants, natural phenomena, environmental aspects, climatic and geological process, all of which have agency on our lives, but also robots, artificial intelligence in the future. Okay, so remember that this was considered in goal 17 as well. All these relationships include not only relationships among the actors, human actors, but also the material aspects and the semiotic networks that are involved. Okay, the networks of knowledge that are involved. So among the variables that play in this complex system of sustainability are, for example, economic variables. This is the financial dimension that deals with the trading of goods and services across nations, and it impacts, for example, nations and continents when, for example, a company decides to settle its headquarters, for example, in the case of Google in Ireland, no? Or how we have avocados available all year long, and we are contributing to deforestation in some areas of Latin America, for example, because of eating the avocados. Or multinationals such as Coca-Cola taking over markets in other parts of the world to the detriment of local industries. Another variable is the environmental. The climate crisis is a good illustration of this, and encompassing, for example, the increased consumptions of goods, clothing, for example, and the rise in mobility, which, for example, the pandemic has shown how reducing mobility has also lowered the levels of pollution. The use of dirty sources of energy, coal and not renewable energies, the lack of actions among in the Western world, destroying our environment for us and for future generations, creating fires in, the ones in Australia a couple 2-3 years ago, in California, many hurricanes and problems all over the world, the melting of ice in the Arctic, and so on. Among the cultural variables, and this is how people's life it's disseminated from a particular perspective, more or less important. For example, how we keep using technologies, selfies, and so on, and to show particular aspects of our lives in social networks. No, think about how these influence people. The and equality, how these influencers who might say, oh, you need to have the perfect nose, or you need to have the perfect shape, and how this influences people, women, for example, and or the way we share food and or music. All these aspects also have great importance. Technology, of course, in this phase of globalization, technology has brought us together. It creates instant connection. It allows me to be speaking to you on video from Spain, and it has many advantages, but it also creates problems. And in particular, we need to look at those people who do not have access to technology, and they're in digital poverty in relation to all the others. Also, the way artificial intelligence is going to influence our future. And political, of course, politics are rule laws and multilateral agreements and so on. And there is a lacking in regulatory controls with respect to sustainability. And in some cases, for example, there's no way to control what's happening in the burning of forests in some countries, which might be intentional in order to have more area for cattle, and the establishing of international organizations across the world and who monopolize markets and things like that. You might be able to think of other examples of how these different variables and aspects influence each other and create intra-relationships and inter-relationship. And for this reason, it is fundamental, it's very important to have a bottom-up approach to sustainability, starting with the physical, perceptual material object level, and moving to the network where it functions, focusing on the relations within the system and the unraveling dynamic between objects and system levels. Also, the semiotic relations. This refers to the use of signs, the communication between different aspects, and the top layer, the system level, which allows for a sort of an integrated configuration and regulating intensive interdisciplinary co-creation. So on your screen you have there a kind of pyramid that begins with the individual, within society, happiness and health, of course, which is pillar 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Moving on to society and economy and culture within society, and then life in general, how we function within a species, ecosystems, and so on, and energy and materials, which are what we use, in order to live. For example, the example that I was giving of how we need food and in order to draw energy to function properly as an individual. And of course, this functions in a particular space, time, and context. The context is the community. The space is a larger area and in a particular time. And all the interrelations between all the different levels, which might not always occur in a sort of pyramidal way. There could be loops in the system. So we're moving now slowly towards the end of the lecture. And in this slide, you can see a kind of chart, the art of change, of how you can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals by creating change, making change possible. for which you need a vision, you need to be inspired, you have to have an idea, you need the skills to put that idea in motion, and also incentives, motivation, and resources. And also, you need an action plan. So the circle that you can see there, the art of change, is a suggestion of how this collaborative process of contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals at the local level, first starting from the individual and then moving towards your area, your family, your friends, your school and university you attend to, and how this can you can do something to change the world. No, without the vision, you might be confused. Without the skills, you might have anxiety. Without incentives, there might be some resistance. Without resources, there is frustration. And with no action plan, we have false starts. So when the lecture is over, maybe if you have any questions and you would like to have a session with me to discuss what changes could be implemented at your university at a local level, I'm very happy to help you with this. So before we finish, as a motivation and to give you some ideas, I'm going to give you an example of how art, because remember at the beginning of my lecture I mentioned that I want to integrate the arts and humanities within the STEM disciplines, scientific disciplines. So let me give you an example of how art can contribute to raise awareness on Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the work by an Australian net artist and game designer, Mess Breeze, who is a member of an online activist group known as Third Faction. And in 2015, she wrote this poem, Anthropocene, which is a meditation on the Anthropocene. So just as a reminder, I'm sure you know, but you know that the Anthropocene is a term that was coined by the chemist Paul Crutzen and marine biologist Eugene Sturmer, and to refer to the impact of humans on the planet. And it is characterized by these encounters between humans and non-human agents that we have already talked about. So the Anthropocene begins to take into consideration these intra and interactions between organisms and other entities, which are non-human and which might be apparently non-biological, inanimate, for example, deserts and stones or whatever. The non-human also includes, as we mentioned, forms of artificial intelligence, technologies, and so on, which are, of course, non-human. So what is this meditation on the Anthropocene that Mess Breeze writes? Well, she uses a language which she invents, which is called Mesangel, and it's combining English language with code features of programming. For example, add C code or fragments of markup language, protocol code, and so on. In the poem, in this particular one, she uses only markup language, mostly made of bracketing. But by breaking the words, she draws attention to multiple meanings. She generates the diversity in the words. No, so in the first word, for example, Anthropocene, she plays with the idea that the Anthropocene is like a scenic scenario, no screen. Also, she says later in the poem. making reference to the fact that our life develops artificially behind screens and with the mobile all the time, no? And she's drawing attention to the fact that behind these screens there is a lot of code, machine language that remains within the machine, but that it is impacting our lives. And you all know about the algorithms in Facebook and in other social networks that locate you and also locate your interests so that they can sell you things when you do a search in Google, for example. No? So the Anthropocene is presenting this paradox of the human impact on the environment, but at the same time how the environment and also the technologies are speaking back. They are speaking back in code. Okay, so this is almost like forms of post-colonial. The subaltern speaks back, but in this case, is technology speaks back. No. So how is Miss Breeze playing with language, human language, and the language of the machine? For in this poem, for example, the term probosthene, Latinization from ancient Greek probos, good, virtuous, but it's also used to signal the conclusion of a chain of reasoning that demonstrates an unlikely proposition. So it may be an echo glitch or a glitch in programming, that she's talking about. In zoology, probos refers to the long, flexible, tubular sucking organs of some insects, as well as certain monkeys and the trump of elephants. So Breeze, in her poem, she associates the term with the following one, obscene, where she's playing with the OBS, Open Broadcaster Software, which is a live streaming software, and of course the scene, the idea of signaling to the dimensions of a spectacle present in the Anthropocene, where we go around taking selfies and photos of everything that's surrounding us, but not really interacting in any other way with this environment. So she links humans, animals, and inanimate objects in her metamorphic poem and also in other of her works, as we will see later. No? And she claims that the Anthropocene is seen as well as a performative, playable scenario beyond the human, and it is a post-human, post-mother, in the various meaning of the word within the box below the poem, that you can see on your screen. So Breeze insists on these scenic dimensions, and she forces an inquiry into the post-ontology of knowledge and cognition, related also to the acquisition of the alphabetic language. She's breaking language, and for those in the humanities, that there are some other artists who have tried to break alphabetic language, human language, in order to draw attention to political implications. For example, Lewis Carroll was one among the first, also James Joyce in the United States, William Burroughs, for example. So Breeze's disruption of the reading experience questions epistemology, inquiring into what the notion of interpretation and explanation may mean, and if this meaning is univocal, and is all related to semiotic communication. So the poem highlights this double political and aesthetic intent in code work poems, and it makes visible the agencies and the inscriptions performed by the machine. So on the right of your screen, there are other examples of her poems. This time they're virtual reality, and she also uses messenger language there, and they all highlight different aspects related to the Sustainable Development Goals. As you can see from the images, these are poems that you play. They're in 3D, and they don't follow linear writing. Very, very interesting to explore, and you can, of course, find them online. So we come now to our last slide, where I present another of Mess Bree's works, a micro-story series entitled VR Vignettes, which won the Queensland University of Technology Digital Literature Award in 2019. And this series is comprised of virtual reality microstories, which require the reader to make active choices in order to navigate what the author terms story boxes. In systems theory, Bruno Latour, the black box is an abstraction representing a class of concrete open system which can be viewed solely in terms of stimuli inputs and output reactions. And in actor network theory, these black boxes are taken from granted elements, and I'm quoting from Latour, well-established facts and problematic artifacts that can be employed risk-free for a variety of purposes. So when reading her stories, I was reminded of the Pandora box, which enables, because these boxes enable unexpected enactions. In the Greek myth, the term pithos it was used for the container, the famous Pandora box, and it was a large jar which was used to store food supplies, and sometimes it was also used as in rituals as a burial urn. And the term is related to pathos, which means grief, more or less. And when opening the box, in the myth, the spirits were liberated, and this created great suffering and distress for humans. So Pandora box came to signify the mistakes and overcoming these difficulties, and it was the only way to become wise. As in the biblical story of Adam and Eve, the key element in Pandora's narrative was who was to blame. And as we know in the story of Adam and Eve, it was the woman who was tempted by the snake and took the apple from the tree. And in Pandora, it's again the woman. It seems to be begging the question, where does the responsibility for our actions lie? No? And so Metz Bree's story boxes inquire into the relocation of the blame and the responsibility of the reader user exploring her work. These vignettes were later part of her project, 2020 project, VR versus V versus, for which you had two screen captures in the previous slide. So one of the vignettes, the one that I have chosen, is a micro story entitled Don't Imagine. Of course, it reminds us of the Beatles' song Imagine. But this one focuses on the impact of bees in permaculture. And the reader has to, you have the image there of the bee on your screen, and the reader has to navigate, click on the different numbers in order to read the lines of the story, which are copied for you on your screen. And so the poem goes like this. Imagine a sculpted bee's nest, a nest earth clay molded, a nest shaped plus sculpted under a generous sun, a nest weather drunk plus tethered through the sky to the earth suspended, a nest warmed by gentle breath, plus calming hands, a nest for carpenter bees, both green and golden green. Now, don't imagine, do. So what the author is implying here is the whole controversy about the bees and how without the bees, we will not have crops, we will not have food, and it's encouraging and the action of the reader, making us reflect on a given situation, an environmental situation, through her poem. So my argument in this paper was that we need to take action. We need to begin to educate in sustainability in schools and in university. I hope to have introduced to you an overview of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Your professor will also have some documents that I will send along with this lecture so that you can explore further all these goals. And the purpose was also not only to let you know, but to encourage you to take action, to do something small on your part to change things. And remember the pyramid. It begins by focusing on the individual, doing something, extending this, doing to the family network, friends and colleagues, and moving on to larger communities. So the final purpose was also to show you that from the humanities, we have a big part to play. The humanities and the arts are about emotions. They're about teaching and communicating empathy, make people feel concern for the problems. And I have given you the example of Mess Breeze, who is an activist and an artist from Australia, who is doing this kind of work. She's also a game designer. She won many awards for her most recent work is a game, a long game in which you can also play, and it makes you reflect on time and space and memory. So I encourage you to explore her work as well and to get involved in little activities to make our world, our futures more sustainable. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much to the One Asian Foundation for inviting me to provide this talk, the Eurasia Foundation. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I can also arrange a Skype meeting or an online meeting with you anytime. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.